Good morning. Welcome to my studio. My name is Nancy Ricciardi and I am an artist. Most of you know that I'm other things besides just an artist. And of course, my most favorite thing is being your art teacher. Here we are in my studio today to do some art. I've been missing you. And it's spring. I've been missing you, but I've got to tell you, I've been doing an awful lot of gardening, and that's been fun. But being out in the garden makes me think of some artists, one in particular. And since I was missing you so much, I thought, okay, let's give this a try. Let's do some art. Imagine that. We're going to use technology. In this series of art lessons, I would like to explore a very special artist, someone who loved nature, someone who loved trees. Now, I was thinking about him a lot because of the fact that I'm wandering around my garden looking at spring and looking at my trees and especially noticing my tree trunks. We all know about tree trunks, right? What color are they? No, not brown. And that's the first thing I wanted to talk to you about today. Let's look at some tree trunks. Now, I went out and I did some photography. I can't really carry my iPad around, so I thought I'd take some pictures to show you some tree trunks. And I've got some right here. This first one I want to show you is a maple tree from my garden. No, not brown. Do you see how gray this tree is? I love this tree. One of the reasons is, do you see all its wrinkles? Kind of looks like an elephant tree, doesn't it? It's a maple. Here's another tree in my garden. And again, I want you to observe. There are lots of grays, very little brown, lots of grays. And are you noticing these white spots all over my tree trunks? These are lichens. They're very flat growths on the tree. Makes them pretty special to look at. Here's a pretty tree from my garden. It's called a crepe myrtle. Now we've been looking at gray tree trunks, but please notice the green in this tree trunk, the light beige, and do you see the purple? Trees are actually made of many kinds of color, but very little brown. Now this tree is an eastern coast tree. It's not used to living in California. It doesn't much like California, not enough humidity in the air. So in addition to those spots, those little white spots that are just flat against the bark, can you see that there's all kinds of bumpy lichens growing in this tree? There's even a little moss in this tree. Yeah, it's not happy, but it sure is pretty. Check out this walnut tree. Now this is an old tree, and I want you to observe the linear patterns. Did you notice this tree still looks very gray, but it's older, and it seems as if older trees start to bring in more of that brown color. Here's one of my favorites. It's a camphor tree, a very old camphor tree. Do you see all the holes in it? Those are peck marks from woodpeckers. They come and they peck into the bark of the tree to try and get out little bugs. Look at these great linear patterns that the little peck marks make. Isn't that interesting? Trees have many beautiful textures. Now I want to tell you something about our artist. He's kind of an amazing guy because he never gives up. People laughed at him. They laughed at his art. And he still kept working. His name is Henri Rousseau. He was born in France in the year 1844. He was born into a very poor family. His father was a tinker. Don't you love that word, tinker? Tinker. He sold pots and pans. And he sold pots and pans from the back of his horse-drawn cart. Can you hear the sound those pots and pans made as he was walking down the road, banging into each other? That's how the name tinker came to be. Henry's father sold pots and pans from town to town, and because Henry was their son, he got to go to school. He wasn't a very good student, except in 2 areas. He loved to draw, and he loved to make music, both arts. In fact, he learned to play the violin so well, and he loved music so much, he ended up writing a waltz that is still played today, almost 200 years later. Now, when Henry was about 9 years old, the family was not doing well. They lost their house in the little town of Laval. They loaded into their tinker wagon and they all rode away, except for Henry. You've heard this kind of story before. They left Henry at school. You know, every day he went to school, and in the afternoon, just like you, when we were going to school, he came home. But when his family had to leave and travel farther and farther away to sell the pots and pans, Henry stayed at school. He became what's known as a boarding student. Henry stayed at school and graduated from his classes when he was about 12 years old. And when he was 12, he went into the army. For the next 3 years, he worked in the army. He went to Morocco. He got to see another country. And when he came back to France, he left the army and decided to get a job. Now, he was very fortunate. He could read, he could write, he could add, he could subtract. And Henry was very fortunate. He got a job at the toll booth as a toll taker. This was a responsible job because as each person came into the city of Paris, you couldn't just walk into Paris in those days. Paris had a big old wall around it. You had to go in through one of the gates. And when you went in through one of those gates, you had to pay to come into the gates. You might be a farmer bringing in your produce. Henry stood there and said, "Whoa, let me check it out." And then he would go and count everything that that person was bringing in, whether it was eggs or vegetables or fruits. And they had to pay to bring those items into Paris to sell. It was Henry's responsibility to add it all up, take the money, and record it in the toll book. On market days, Henry was very busy, but for most of the time, Henry just sat there, which pleased him no end. Because you see, Henry loved art. And it was Henry's dream to become an artist. When he was sitting there for hours on end, waiting for the next person to want to enter the city of Paris, Henry drew. Fortunately for him, he was outside the city of Paris, looking out onto all the beautiful fields and the forest. Henry drew trees. And I just thought that was so lovely because I've been really looking at our trees. I decided that what we would do first is to do some tree drawings, but I want to start with just the tree trunks. We'll look at leaves in the next lesson, but right now I just want to look at tree trunks. And I have an assignment for you. Since we're not in the classroom, we get to go outside and look at nature ourselves. And I want you to look at tree trunks. I want you to notice, like my tree trunks, that trees aren't brown. Unless they're redwood trees. Redwood trees are very brown. Trees have many colors. And they don't just have colors. As we saw in my photographs, they have textures. Some are bumpy. Some are linear patterned. Some are smooth, some have swirls of color. Go outside and take a look at some trunks, and then I want you to draw them. I have a plan. Here's what I want to do. I want to draw some tree trunks. I want you to draw some tree trunks. We're going to draw tree trunks together. And then when you finish your tree trunks, if you can, later on, wait till I tell you, I want you to bring them to school. You're going to make some trees. We got to get some leaves on them before we bring them to school. But you're going to make some trees. And if you can, I want you to bring your trees to school. I'm going to take those trees and make a big mural out of them. We are going to end up with a giant forest, kind of like the forest Henry was looking at outside his toll booth. But in his imagination, it was never just a forest. Wait till you see what happens. Okay, now if we're going to do some drawing, you're going to need a piece of paper. Now I'm lucky. I have some white paper here in my studio. Do you have white paper at home? You might need to use Xerox paper, copy paper. If you have some copy paper, be sure to ask your parents first before you start to use it. You can use a piece of copy paper, and for my demonstration, I am going to be using a black marker because pencil doesn't show up very well when I'm working on my drawing board. You can use a pencil. You can use a crayon. I'm going to be using crayons in a minute. Do you have any sidewalk chalk? Think of all the different things you can use for drawing. Whatever you have available. If you need just to use a ballpoint pen, that would be fine. Remember, this is art. In art, there are no mistakes, and the only tool you need to do it correctly is your imagination. So, I'm going to draw a tree trunk. Notice I'm not making it very straight. The fact is, in nature, there are very few straight lines. I'm going to start to put in where my branches might come out of my tree trunk. I'm not going to worry about any leaves today. I'm not even going to worry about small branches. Just get a few branches in here. And then I want to start showing my bark. Now I can do that simply using one of my favorite drawing methods. My TKs are experts at this. In fact, I know you all are, because it's the very first kind of drawing you do. We call this scribbling. But don't ever think scribbling is not art, because the very first thing they're going to teach you to do when you get to college is how to scribble. They don't call it scribbling by the time you get to college. They have a better name for it. They call it gesture. I've used some gesture marks here to give my bark some interesting design. And then I'm going to take my crayon and do some coloring. Remember, the more color, the more interesting. Let's see. Tree trunks aren't brown, they're gray. I've got a black here, so I'm going to use that black. Is that black? Yeah. I'm going to use that black lightly so it starts to create kind of a gray. Now, I'm just demonstrating this quickly. I'd like you to take your time and really put some effort. Didn't I say there was some purple in that tree? That one tree we looked at? I don't have a purple here, but I do have a blue. Nothing wrong with a little blue in your tree, right? Especially when you combine it with the green. Look what happens. Isn't that interesting? And just because I know there's got to be a little brown somewhere, I'm going to pull out this golden brown, and I'm going to add that to my tree. Now, once I've finished drawing, I'm going to take my tree and I'm going to cut it out. Do you need to be perfect about this? No, of course not. Perfect art is boring. Doesn't mean it's not nice to look at. If somebody takes their time and does a very perfect job at getting their work done, their artwork done, doesn't mean that's bad. It just means that what will happen is people won't look at it as long. Your brain looks at that piece of art and says, oh, look, everything's exactly where it's supposed to be. Oh, this is so nice. Let's look at something else. What you really want as an artist is for somebody to look at your art and say, whoa, wait a minute, I gotta look at that again. And the longer they look at it, the more likely they are to buy it. And to appreciate all the work that went into your process. All right, here we go, I'm almost done. We're gonna cut out our tree. And like I said, I don't want you to glue it down any place yet. I just want you to have your tree trunk, okay? See my tree trunk? That's pretty cool, isn't it? Now, we can even make it more interesting. Trees have texture, right? Well, check it out. Let's scrunch it up. And then let's fold it back out again. And notice, it's even more tree-like, isn't it? Here's my tree. What is that I heard you say? You don't have any white paper at home and your mom won't let you use any of the copy paper? Does that mean you can't participate? Of course not. Don't ever forget, there are many artists out there that we have studied in the past who didn't have money for paper. So they didn't use nice drawing paper. They used whatever they had available. And class, if you take the time to walk around your house, you may be able to find lots of things. One of the things I love to draw on, paper bags. Now I've already cut the bottom off this paper bag. I'm going to pull off the handles because I don't need them. But I'm not going to throw them away. You never know what you can use that for. We're going to get into some collage work here. You never know. Then I'm going to open up my bag. I kind of turn it around, look for the place where the seam is. Okay, there it is, right there. It's hard to show you, but there's a seam right here. Take my scissors, cut along the seam. And then I want you to notice just how big my paper is. Yes, bigger than my iPad. I'm going to cut a smaller piece from my large piece of paper. And then I can draw on this. I know it's brown. And we just said that trees are not brown. But trees do have a little brown in them, right? So we could turn around and draw a tree on this. Okay. Now I'm thinking about that camphor tree. I really like my camphor tree. And I think I'm going to start just with a crayon. I'll start with a black crayon this time. And I am going to make a nice big trunk. I'm going to show where the branches come off. I'm not going to worry about branches today. And in addition to making some linear patterns in the bark, because if you remember, my camphor tree had a lot of linear patterns, kind of sectioned off. There were those woodpeckers. Remember the woodpeckers? And the woodpeckers were looking for lunch in my camphor tree. Apparently there were plenty of bugs hiding out in those crevices in the linear patterns. And so the woodpeckers came along and pecked in patterns across the surface of my tree. Love those marks. See how many patterns you can make. Remember, your patterns don't have to be perfect. I'm not interested in looking at perfect. I'm much more interested in looking at your imagination and seeing how you see these things. It's always good to go outside and take a look and then come on in and draw. Now remember, when you finish with your trees, you just want to keep them together because our next lesson is going to involve leaves. All those beautiful leaves are starting to come out in my garden, and oh my gosh, the leaves on the trees are amazing. We are going to look at different patterns. We are going to look at different designs. We are going to look at different colors. It would be nice if each of you could design and create, let's say, oh, there's my purple. Couldn't find it before. 3 trees. Especially if you think you're going to be able to drive them into school, that would be great. 3 trees. And just think of how many trees we could end up with if everybody brought some trees into school. We could have a really nice mural by the time we were done. And then it would be fun to see it when we come back to school. We're going to be adding many elements to this, not just the trees, but we're going to start with the trees. Now, next time we get together, I'm going to be talking about leaves. Today we talked about tree trunks. Next time we're going to talk about leaves. And then we're going to put our leaves into our trees and see what happens to them. Oh, there was another thing I wanted to talk to you about. I've showed you how to use white paper, and I've showed you how to use a paper bag. But not everybody has those things available either. Do you have any newspaper at home? You know, newspaper is one of those things. I love to work with newspaper. Don't ever be afraid to draw. All these words, you can draw upside down on it. You can draw right side up on it. I try and ignore when I'm drawing. I try to ignore the pictures. I try to use a piece that doesn't have too many pictures on it. But that's just me. You might want to turn around and use those pictures in your drawing. And then use this paper to draw. Next time we meet, I'll show you one of the tree trunks that I did very quickly just using newspaper. It's very interesting. And don't ever be afraid to scrunch it up and lay it back out again, because texture is always a nice thing to add to your composition. All right, so Henri Rousseau, born in 1844, almost 200 years ago, in the little town of Laval, in the country of France. He's going to have a very interesting life. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you back here next time so we can look at leaves. Thank you. Bye.